So always visualize your self-image as power. And by the way, if some of you think we're sacrilegious by calling you gods, remember, in the scriptures, they call Moses God. And some people also feel that it's some kind of a threat to God if they are something. In other words, they feel like if I become something, it'll take something away from him. No, it adds to. To solve this problem, if you've had this kind of training, remember that God even makes a statement that the kings of the earth will bring their glory into heaven. In other words, do we add more glory than to God? Can you visualize a father sitting there watching a football game and his son's All-American? And he's playing the game and the father's sitting there very passive all afternoon. No expressions and no sounds. What's that father want? Well, he wants him to show off, doesn't he? He wants him to grab the ball and make touchdowns. All right, what's God want from you? He wants you to perform. He wants you to move from the baby level to the power level. Have you ever deified a football team? Have you ever got to the place where you knew they couldn't be beaten? Now, do you have good self-image as long as it lasts? Are you beginning to see the fallacy of identification? The fallacy of watching as a spectator and saying my self-image is what they are. Now, we do this with movie stars. Did you know that? All types of hero worship. Let's go to England. Do they do it with the Queen? Is the Queen of England really human? Well, she might be to an American, but is she to a Canadian or to someone over in England? No, I'm afraid that she's God. They've deified her. We have royalty on the continent of Europe, and in most cases, royalty has been deified. You just put purple on, do you feel great? That's royalty. Now, you want to know what I visualize? Let me tell you, I believe in going all out. I get my powerhouse through God the Father. I actually visualize that he comes down and he said, son, you've been doing pretty good lately. You've been handling everything just perfect. It's time for promotion. We've got a new purple robe for you. Now, when I'm visualizing this, do I feel it on my shoulders? New crown. And there's 30 billion galaxies over here. We're going to turn over completely to you now. I visualize my new rulership. What's beginning to happen when you do this for 30 days? Then suddenly you're called back to this earth for a minor problem. Last summer, we were cleaning out 4 chicken houses, and these are 250 feet long and 50 feet wide each. And the compost in them was about 2 feet deep, straight across. And we were under a deadline because the little chicks were already in the incubator. There were 50,000 of them arriving. We had about 25 equipment breakdowns. Very frustrating. Bringing things in, working, and there was one time there I worked around the clock. I don't think I went to bed for 3 days. And I was enjoying it to no end. One of the men that was working for me, he says, how on earth can you stay so calm in this situation? He says, I just can't understand you. I've been watching you and you should crack up. He says, I've never seen such cool persistence. He says, you're just downright deliberate. Now, he was only looking at a little problem on one planet, wasn't he? He didn't know that where was I half the time? Taking care of my 30 billion galaxies. Now, could I have any problem on this earth that would be too much? There was this mother. She'd been reared in the city all of her life. Sure enough, she ends up marrying a farmer. So out to her new home after the wedding. And she's trying to get used to this farm life, and before she knows it, she has twins. Oh, they were real nice twins. They were identical in every respect. They even had the same spot in the same place. There's only one big difference in them. One was an optimist, and the other one was a pessimist of the worst order. Finally, one day she couldn't stand it anymore, so she put him in the car and hauled him off to the city and went to a doctor, to a psychiatrist. She says, I don't want much. She says, just even him up a little. So, being a doctor, he told her what to do. He says, when their birthdays roll around, you buy that little pessimist a room full of the nicest toys you can find. She says, that's fine. She says, what do I do for the optimist? And he says, you got manure out there, don't you? She said, yeah. She says, we got lots of that. She says, I'll tell you, we get a big cardboard box, about so big, and fill it full of manure. When their birthdays rolled around, she did just like the doctor ordered. Then curiosity got the best of her. She wanted to know, how the prescription was working out. So she quietly tiptoed to the door of the pessimist. He had taken all the toys apart, thrown them against the wall, cheap toys. I never get anything nice, nothing as nice as a neighbor kid has. She thought, oh no. The first thought was that we made the pessimist worse. What about that optimist? So she rushes to the optimist's bedroom. And there he is, madly digging in the manure up to his elbows. Can you hear him saying underneath his breath, you can't fool me. Where there's manure, there must be a pony. There will always be two kinds of people. All right, we say then that we are different. Now, if something is different, can you add it up and divide it? Would it be proper tonight for me to take apples, oranges, houses, horses, and pencils, add them up and divide by the number and say I have an average what?
That would be too many.
In other words, what have we done to humans? Now, the minute I add up humans and have an average, I've assumed what? That they're alike, and that assumption is not correct. Therefore, can I compare you with anyone else? In other words, the comparison is a fallacy. Now, can you compare the way I play a piano with someone else? That you can, but not me. I am by position. This has not one thing to do with what I do. And this in itself is a relief to me. Let me give you an illustration. Let's take my son. He is my son simply because he's my son and for no other reason. Now, let's look at the doing. Let's assume that he walks. He's still my son. But then what if he should stumble? I want you to know, no matter how many times he stumbles, he's still my son. Therefore, we say that after I have established who I am, then the next part of this concept is that the doing comes natural. No strain. An illustration would be cows or chickens. They give milk, they lay eggs, because this is the way they are by being, and the doing, we say, comes natural. Now, if you want to carry this concept further in your own life, there would be no failures. You would say that all of my failures are just attempts, or they're negative feedback, and therefore you would have nothing personally identified with failure. Now let's look at your self-image. How would this be affected? Well, if my self-image is based on what I do, how could I predict my self-image tomorrow? You see, I'd have to wait until tomorrow to find out what I did to find out who I am. Now, if you go along with this concept, you won't have to wait till tomorrow to find out who you are. Tonight, you can know who you are by position, and will that position change tomorrow? No. Therefore, will you be secure and insulated in who you are tonight? Now, if my self-image is based on what I do, we say I'm under constant strain. I can never relax. And I always have to be proving to everybody who I am by what I do. Parents sometimes fall into this pitfall. And they tell Junior, if you do this, we'll love you. Now, Junior interprets this immediately, the fact that I'm not loved and I don't have a position until I do. And this results in just one thing, producing inferiority complexes. Also, you know, it makes a failure fear lurk behind the little boy, because he's always afraid that the doing won't match up to the expectations and that he'll be a failure. Why don't you use this concept tonight to be free and never identify personally with failures again? Now, before we leave this concept, let's look at it for another wonderful truth. I know tonight who I am fully, completely now. In other words, we say it's a completed concept. Now, this allows no growth. And without growth, you become static. But now, wait just a minute. I want to carry the other side of the coin. Do I know tonight what I can do? No, I don't know what I can do. And let me tell you one thing else here tonight that I think is extremely important. I'll never know what my fullest capabilities are on this earth. Now, how do I have growth? I accomplish one thing, then I'm able to visualize something greater, and then I conquer that. This is growth. I'll give you an illustration. I'm going to climb a mountain. All the way up the mountain, I know who I am. But I do not know yet what I can do. Now, I reach the top of the mountain, I'm able to visualize another valley and another mountain, and then I'm able to conquer more. Here's a salesman. He knocks on this door, she slams it. This one, she slams it. 10 in a row. He's sad. He's crawling in the gutter. Back to the sales manager. Sales manager reaches over, pats him on that. Nice dog. You've had a hard day. Here's some aspirins. Go home. We'll try it again tomorrow. Have another sales meeting tomorrow morning and we'll start you off right. All right? Same neighborhood, same 10 women, just as mean as they were before. Here comes a bright young salesman with a good self-image. He knocks on the first, she slams the door, second slams the door, after the 10th one slams the door. He walks across the other side of the street to get a little perspective here. You gotta slow down here for a moment. And he scratches his head and he says, I wonder what's wrong with those women.
That would be too good.
Is there anything wrong with him? Of course not. He decides, though, he'd better go to another part of town. A little change will help. By the way, after he makes a dozen other sales that day, he goes home that night. Can you see him in his bathroom? No one in the world is watching. You do this tonight. It'll tell you whether you got a good self-image or not. Lock the door. Walk in front of the mirror and take the pedals on your coat like that, and say, what a little show-off I am, but ain't I cute? Now, if you can't do that, you've got self-image problems. Just try it tonight. Oh, by the way, when you're in a bathroom, I have one more experiment for you. I was asked on television the other day in an interview, what can you tell the people right now that they can go do and help themselves? What a fascinating question. I says, easy. Grab a pencil and paper and rush to the bathroom and lock the door. Now, can you imagine what everybody in the whole television audience is getting ready to... And can you imagine the guy who's doing the interviewing? He's looking at me. We're on the air. So, there's nothing he can do. I mean, he's got to turn it over to me and let me keep talking. And I say, on one side of your sheet of paper, write down exactly who you think you are. If you know you're no good, write down there, I'm no good. I can't do these things, and I'm afraid of these people, and I just as soon run, and sometimes I feel like hiding in a shell. And in other words, do what? Write down exactly what you think you are. Now, the reason you have to lock the door is because would you ever want anyone to see this paper? How about your spouse? That'd be the last person that should ever look. You say, well, I tell them everything. Oh, no, you don't. You might tell them a sex affair you had before marriage, and you might call that everything, but would you tell them the inmost secrets of your inferiority complexes? Can you imagine a man telling his wife, I have a feeling I just can't make a living for this family? I mean, could he ever tell her that? No, we don't tell our spouses everything. But on this paper, you write down everything. Now, at the end of this sheet, you're liable to go into deep depression. Because you've done what? You put it on paper, and there's the truth. Now you've got to recognize what? The law of cybernetics says that everything I got on the paper, what will happen? This will come about, and will I be able to keep it a secret? Now this will get through to you. In other words, I'm looking at this paper, and will everybody in town know this? Unless I do what? Okay, turn the paper over. And on this side, write down whatever you would like to be if there were no limitations on the face of the earth, and you could be anything on earth you wanted to be. I mean, just complete freedom. All right, now when you get through, tear it up and flush it down the toilet. And let me caution you, it doesn't all go down sometimes, the first flush. And if you've got a curious spouse, they will actually put it together again. So stay there a little while and make sure it's gone. And by the way, as it does disappear, why not at that moment let that self-image go? I know this is humorous. You should have seen the way the TV interview went. Now, if what was on one side of the paper goes down the toilet forever, what are we going to do with what's on the other side of the paper? Visualize that from that moment on, who are you? Everything you ever wanted to be. And you'll run into the most marvelous freedom you've ever had. You become a brand new person. I think it's just wonderful to feel the freedom of a new being. For life is a mirror of king and slave, which is just what you are and do. Then give to the world the best you have, and the best will come back to you. The cry of the Creator. Bring me men to match my mountains. Bring me men to match my plains. Men with empires in their bosoms and new eras in their brains. Now, do these kind of poems fit with the new image? You see, what I'm trying to do is to get you to feel something. Then you can visualize. I know whatever you visualize will happen. I mean, I've used this law over and over and over, and I know it works. I can give you a derogatory story that will show the power of this visualization. Even though it's negative, it illustrates the point. This man was in his 40s, and he was a deacon in his church. Honorable. He even had some Boy Scout troops that he was a leader of. He was a carpenter. He worked on new construction, building houses. He had a nice family, including a 9-year-old daughter whom he loved very much. One afternoon in the fall, it was one of those Indian summer days, a 9-year-old girl walked by the house that he was working on, and he raped her. Now, isn't this startling? In other words, when he was interviewed by the newspapers, why? He says, I don't know. By the way, that's a horrible thing to do. Publish in the papers to all the red-blooded American men, this man cracks and doesn't know why. I've actually had a man come to me for counseling. He says, I think I'm going to go crazy. I said, what in the world makes you think so? He says, well, everybody snaps now and then. I don't know when my turn's coming. He's been reading too much in the papers. By the way, what finally caused him to come for me for counseling, this father had taken a baseball bat and killed his wife and children, and he thought, well, I might do that. Always remember, for everything a man does, is there a reason? You just don't do something. There's a reason for it. By the way, there's a reason here. When they interviewed him, the psychologists interviewed him in depth, they found out that 3 years prior to the time that he raped the girl, now this is going back pretty far, isn't it? 3 years, a girl happened to walk by, a small girl, and by the way, every once in a while, small girls have a body shape of a full-grown woman. And the wind happened to blow her dress, and for an instant he had a thought. Now here's an interesting thing. Do you suppose every man on earth has this? Absolutely. But what do you suppose every man on earth does with it? Censors it as an act of will immediately. You know, he didn't. He indulged in it for about 60 seconds. And after he did that, he thought there was no harm done. No one knew it. No one would ever know it. Oh, it was a few months later before he did it again. Then he did it for about 5 minutes. And pretty soon he decided that this is a nice way to solve the boredom on the job. Now, he actually admitted to the psychologist that prior to the rape, he had been known to spend 3 hours in an afternoon in fantasy to keep from being bored with his work. Now, when they asked, did you think there was any danger? He said, absolutely not. I'm a big, strong man. I do whatever I want to do. He says, I knew I had control of myself, and I knew I would never really ever do anything. Now, they asked him, just before you raped the girl, did you try to stop? He said, yes. Could he? In other words, we're saying, had he set in the principles of cybernetics into motion, and it was beyond his control. Some people say, well, where's the willpower? It's very simple. The first girl he saw 3 years prior, did he have willpower? The will only does what? It allows you to choose the image. And then is the act of the will over. That's the function of the will, is to choose the image. And after you choose the image, the will has performed its function. Then we do what? We visualize. Then if you visualize sufficiently, can the will step in and say, well, we did the wrong thing? After you reach a certain point, then it cannot. You see, your visualization has to be something that is a part of your actual belief. Like right now, tonight, you could run barefoot across hot coals without being burned. There's no question about it. But you would have to be able to believe it. Whereas in the world tonight, we have men that can run over hot coals or across nails that are pointed up. But they have to go through a system of belief which is almost self-hypnotism. But once they believe it, then the coals cannot burn them. If we want to push this further, we can show that everything is within, not without. Like tonight, I could hypnotize you and take this chalk. Now we know that's cold. There's nothing in there that's hot. But I can tell you while you're hypnotized that this is red hot. I can touch the back of your hand. And what will happen? Now would you like to tell me where the blister came from? In fact, while you're hypnotized, what if we tell you that it's snowing in here and it's cold? You just shiver and get goose pimples. Then what will be a sudden change in the weather. It's 102. You just break out in a sweat. In other words, we say, does your mind try desperately to cooperate with whatever you've told it's true? And this is likewise true with all of your images of your abilities. In other words, you're trying desperately to cooperate with your limitations. And by the way, are the limitations, are they all false? All false. All put there by your worst enemy. And by the way, if somebody else tried to treat you this way, what would you do to them? You just wouldn't stand for it. You wouldn't take it. Right now, if I have changed my self-image, now am I able to achieve? Yes, because have I got rid of the barrier that would keep me from achieving? All right, I'd like to give you the steps to achievement. But before I do, I have to take the other side of the coin of success. Remember I told you happiness was two sides? One side was achieving, the other side is well-adjusted. To show you how they fit together, I cannot continue with achieving until I first handle well-adjusting. To be well-adjusted allows me the first step of achievement. All right, let's tonight go through being well-adjusted. Turning your manual to the illustration on negative feedback. The first law will be Alaska to Hawaii. And we're going to use the birds. I learn a lot from the birds and the bees. I study them constantly. In Alaska, we're going to have a hatch of a bird. This bird's going to decide one day that it should go to see the grass skirts. Has it ever been there before? Never been there before. As it flies along, something like a storm can make it go off course, and it will correct. But the point is, we call this mistakes, do we not? But if the bird would be 1 degree off, it would end up in a watery death in the ocean. I firmly believe tonight that this is an object lesson by our Creator. He scooped out all the islands south of Hawaii for what purpose? To show the skeptic what? There's no chance for error. In other words, if there were one other island down here, you would believe what? Well, we could miss the Hawaiian Islands and we'd make it to that other island and we would survive. But are there any? Therefore, that bird has to be accurate, does it not? How accurate? 100% accuracy. Zero in on Hawaii and it lives. Now, we're talking about the law of cybernetics, and here we are calling it instinct. Now, instinct means that the goal was put in by the Creator. It's still cybernetics all the way through. All right, let's take another law. This one we're going to call basically cybernetics, and this will be a submarine, this will be a launch, and this will be a destroyer. Well, again, I have perfection. The servo mechanism and the torpedo going toward the destroyer will go straight across. Will the current move it off course? Chances are it will. Now, watch, we've introduced another variable. Could this move forward, backward, or stand still? Will I have a direct hit? Do I call it perfection again? Does this particular error halfway across bother me? I want to show you one of the secrets of success. It's basically to make mistakes. He who makes mistakes is bound to succeed. He who stops making mistakes has totally failed. In other words, if you're afraid to do something for fear you'll do something wrong, you're through. All right, let's take another law. Here will be my parents. This will be birth. Notice I'm comparing hatching to launching to birth. Over here will be my self-image, and I'm going to zero in on it. Are you in orbit tonight whether you like it or not? We've already got you started for what? Whatever you think you are. Now we're going to call this a success device or a failure device. We have to put one of these two words on because if you put failure here, it is a failure device. But does it work? It's just as accurate for failure as it is for success. Might you go off course? You'll receive negative feedback. The only difference is you probably won't obey it because you don't know what it is. Would you continue going off course if you didn't obey it? Then you'll get more intense negative feedback. You won't do anything about that either. Normally. Will you still go off course? Boy, then you really get feedback. And then you obey it. And you arrive here. A little harassed because you disobeyed your negative feedback, but you still have perfection.